Hello everyone and welcome to Chapter 4, Part 2. It took an hour, perhaps two. He could not measure time yet and didn't care for the sun to get halfway up. With it came some warmth, some bits of it at first, and with the heat came clouds of insects, thick, swarming hordes of mosquitoes that flocked to his body, made a living coat on his exposed skin, clogged his nostrils when he inhaled, poured into his mouth when he opened it to take a breath. It was not possibly believable. Not this. He had come through the crash, but the insects were not possible. He coughed them up, spat them out, sneezed them out, closed his eyes and kept brushing his face, slapping and crushing them by the dozens, by the hundreds. But as soon as he cleared a place, as soon as he killed them, more came. Thick, whining, buzzing masses of them, mosquitoes and some small black flies he had never seen before, all biting, chewing, taking from him. In moments, his eyes were swollen shut and his face puffy and round to match his battered forehead. He pulled the torn pieces of his windbreaker over his head and tried to shelter it in, but the jacket was full of rips and didn't work. In desperation, he pulled his t-shirt up to cover his face, but that exposed the skin of his lower back, and the mosquitoes and flies attacked the new soft flesh of his back so viciously that he pulled his shirt down. In the end, he sat with the windbreaker pulled up, brushed with his hands, and took it, almost crying in frustration and agony. There was nothing left to do, and when the sun was fully up and heating him directly, bringing steam off of his wet clothes and bathing him with the warmth, the mosquitoes and flies disappeared. Almost that suddenly. 1 minute he was sitting in the middle of a swarm, the next they were gone, and the sun was on him. Vampires, he thought. Apparently they didn't like the deep night. Perhaps it was too cool and they couldn't take the direct sunlight, but in that gray time in the morning when it began to get warm and before the sun was full up and hot, he couldn't believe them. Never, in all that reading, in all of the movies he had watched on television about the outdoors, never once had they mentioned the mosquitoes or flies. All they ever showed on the naturalist shows was beautiful scenery or animals jumping around having a good time. He pulled himself up to stand against the tree and stretched, bringing new aches and pains. His back muscles must have been hurt as well. They almost seemed to tear when he stretched. And while the pain in just his forehead seemed to be abating somewhat, just trying to stand made him weak enough to nearly collapse. The backs of his hands were puffy and his eyes were almost swollen shut from the mosquitoes, and he saw everything in a narrow squint. Not that there was much to see, he thought, scratching the bites in front of him, in front of the lake, the deep blue lake. He had a sudden picture of the plane sunk in the lake, down and down in the blue with the pilot's body still strapped in the seat, his hair waving. He shook his head, more pain. That wasn't something to think about. He looked at his surroundings again. The lake stretched out slightly below him. He was at the base of the L, looking up the long part with the short part out to his right. In the morning light and calm, the water was absolutely, perfectly still. He could see the reflections of the trees at the other end of the lake. Upside down in the water, they seemed almost like any other forest, an upside down forest to match the real one. As he watched, a large bird, he thought, looked like a crow, but it seemed larger, flew on top of the real forest, and the reflection of the bird matched it, both flying out over the water. Everything was green, so green, it went into him. The forest was largely made up of pines and spruce with stands of some low brush smeared here and there, and thick grass and some other kind of small brush over. He couldn't identify most of it except the evergreens and some leafy trees he thought might be aspen. He'd seen pictures of aspen in the mountains and on television. The country around the lake was moderately hilly, but the hills were small, almost hummocks, and there were very few rocks, except to his left there lay a rocky ridge that stuck out, overlooking the lake, about 20 feet high. If the plane had come down a little to the left, it would have hit the rocks and never made it to the lake. It would have been destroyed. The word came. I would have been destroyed. Luck, he thought. I have luck. I had good luck. He knew that was wrong. If he had good luck, his parents wouldn't have divorced because of the secret, and he wouldn't have been flying with a pilot who had a heart attack, and he wouldn't be here where he had to have good luck to keep him from being destroyed. If you keep walking back from good luck, he thought, you'll come back to bad luck. He shook his head again, wincing, another thing not to think about. The rocky ridge was rounded and seemed to be of some kind of sandstone with bits of darker stone layered and stuck into it. Directly across the lake from it, at the inside of the L of the lake, was a mound of sticks and mud rising up out of the water, a good 8 or 10 feet. At first Brian couldn't place it, but knew that he somehow knew what it was, had seen it in films, and then a small brown head popped out to the surface of the water near the mound and began swimming off the short leg of the L, leaving a V of ripples behind it, and he remembered where he'd seen it. It was a beaver house, called a beaver lodge, in a special he'd seen on the public channel. A fish jumped, not a large fish, but it made a big splash near the beaver, as if there was a signal to look there. Little slops, the fish began jumping, hundreds of them jumping and slapping around in the water. Brian watched them for a long time, but still in half a daze, not thinking very well. The scenery was very pretty, he thought, and there were new things to look at, but it was all green and blue. It was all a blur. And he was used to the gray and the black of the city, the sounds of the city, the traffic in the city, the people talking, the sounds. Here, at first, it was silent. Or he thought it was silent, but when he started to listen, really listen, he heard thousands of things. Hisses and blurks of small sounds, birds singing, the hum of insects, the splashes from the fish jumping. There was great noise here, but a noise he did not know, and the colors were new to him, and the colors and noise mixed in his mind to make a green-blue blur that he could hear as a hissing pulse, and he was still tired, so awfully tired, and standing had taken so much energy that it had drained him. He supposed he was still in some kind of shock from the crash, and there was still pain, the dizziness of the strange feeling. He found another tree, a tall pine with no branches until the top. He sat with his back against it, looking down at the lake, with the sun warming him, and in a few moments he scrunched down and began to fall asleep again. And that is the second part of chapter 4. Enjoy your week, everyone, and I hope that you really take the time to answer the questions with detail. Thank you.